Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining our webinar entitled Revealing the Global Green Hydrogen Landscape, Insight from Over 1,000 Global Projects. My name is Max Ellacott and I manage the portfolio of project databases at PV Tech Research. And today I'm delighted to have Joe Hennessy on as the speaker, who is our lead green hydrogen analyst. Firstly, Joe is going to be talking you through our recently released global project database, including a few examples, as well as the main contents and how the report is broken down. He'll also then be taking you through an overview of the market from the global pipeline all the way through to projects that have already been deployed. Here he'll be exploring the top line figures for both worldwide and regional deployment, as well as market trends and the overall direction in which the industry is headed. The Global Green Hydrogen Database is now live, and for anyone looking to acquire the data, feel free to get in touch after the session. I'll now hand over to Joe, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end, so if you could please submit any questions into the box, we'll address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Max. So, yeah, let's just jump right into it. So, just a bit about me and a bit about the company. So, for the company, PV Tech are a well-known brand inside solar media who have been part of Informa market since 2024, who are also part of Informa PLC, an events, digital services and academic research group with a market cap of about $13 billion. And then a little about me. I joined PV Tech in 2024 as a market analyst to help create this database. As Max said, today we'll be going through the database with some sample projects and some content in the report, and then an overview of the market with graphics to show the long and short-term pipelines, the under construction and operational sites. So just a bit about the report. So the report is made on Excel, and if you purchase it, you'll receive the raw data as that Excel file. Each category of the report will have a filter to make it easy to find sites that are more useful, and the options are to buy the report as a yearly subscription with quarterly updates or as a one-off copy. So we will use a sample project which is split into multiple phases, and since this project is part built, part under construction and part planning, it allows us to show the features of the whole database with one project. So just to start off, each project, so the size and the name. So each project or phase of project will have a unique reference number which is sorted by country. Planned capacity will be the given capacity by the developers involved or the electrolyser supplier. And the ideal production capacity will be a calculation based off of the megawatt capacity and the technology of the electrolyser. These first three columns will stay as you scroll across to display the important initial information about each project. The year of completion for operational projects is the actual year, and then for a pipeline project, it will be a forecast using factors like the pipeline of the developers, the size and the location of the projects, and the funding profile, and some others. The prospective build-out is another way that we track the status of projects, and our methodology is currently a 0% project is something mothballed, postponed, or cancelled. A 25% project is something in the early stages of planning. A 50% is something in the later stages of planning. 75% will be under construction, and then 100% is operational. So now a little bit about a market and the long-term pipeline. So this graphic was made using the prospective build-out metric from the slide before. The average size of project increases as you go up the pipeline, as you might expect. The average size for an early stage project is about 650 megawatts, and the later stage is about 125. For the early stages especially, there are quite a few massive projects in areas with lower renewable costs, which skew the averages a little, but shouldn't be too much given the number of projects. For what these stages usually mean is without major delays, if the projects go to completion, most early stage projects will be operational in the next 5 to 10 years, late stage around 3 to 5, and under construction 3 years. So for the funding and incentives, the funding route will show any known incentive programs for each project and also where the funding comes from if that's different. The funding amount will be found from a website of a developer or the incentive programs websites, and the funding will be spread out by phase according to capacity for multi-phase projects. The project cost is found in a similar way from a developer or trusted source and will include both the electrolyser and the renewable asset. So for the location, the address 1 and 2 will be the two smallest geographic identifiers found about the project, so usually a town or a city or an equivalent. The region will be the biggest division that the country has, so like a state in the US or a state in Germany in this case. And the coordinates will be the exact location of the center of the project if that's given. If that's not given, it'll be a suitable location inside the most specific identifier given in the report. So this graphic shows a short time pipeline of our selected regions. This uses the prospective build-out metric from before and then removes the early phase projects for better short-term visibility. Unsurprisingly, China has the largest late-stage pipeline in the world at around 40 gigawatts, followed by the rest of the world, Europe, the US, and India. The rest of the world section includes lots of areas with huge hydrogen potential. The Middle East and North Africa have a huge pipeline with a lot of government support and access to cheap renewables with solar storage and also wind in certain areas. South America is also an attractive place to develop, although it currently has less government support than the MENA region. This is offset by availability of land and even cheaper wind, solar storage, and even hydro generation, depending on where you build. Many foreign developers have large-scale facilities in the planning phases with the potential to sell the hydrogen to local fertilizer companies or ship it to foreign off-takers in Europe and East Asia. In Europe, most capacity is around the places with cheaper renewables or around areas around off-takers, which are usually industrial areas currently. There's a split in the market between building near off-takers and building in areas for ideal renewable generation, getting a pipeline of some sort of transportation to the off-taker. The largest producers in Europe are currently Germany, usually from wind and solar, Scandinavia, usually from wind and hydro, and Spain from solar. The operational projects in Europe are in that 1 to 25 megawatt range, with much larger under construction, so we should see the landscape changing, especially with offshore wind having the potential to power larger and larger electrolyzers. The US has a fairly small late-stage pipeline comparatively, a lot of which is due to the 45V part of the hydrogen tax credit part of the IRA being delayed until very recently. With some of the more specific roadblocks being removed from the start of the year, the development very much depends on the regional hydrogen hubs and the state-level policies to see if it can become an attractive market. India is a growing market and probably where projects move the quickest outside of China. They have good regulatory policies, potential electrolyzer manufacturing, as well as cheap solar, wind, and hydro. It's a very attractive place to build as it should have some of the cheapest levelized costs of hydrogen in the world. So for the development, the original developer is the companies that develops a project through to the end of the planning phase. The final developer is the company that takes the site from planning permission to operational. The asset owner is the company that owns the site post-completion and will only be filled in if it's different to the final developer. The project partners are all other companies involved, like technical partners, technical suppliers, or other off-takers. The planners do the studies involved in the project, so like the FEED or the feasibility studies, if they're not done by the developers. And the likely EPC are the companies who are likely to build the projects. For the technology and power section, the electrolyzer suppliers are the company that manufactures the electrolyzers, and if there are multiple, they'll be separated by a comma. The number of units are the number of electrolyzer modules or stacks supplied to the project. The end-use sector will be the sector it ends up in if that's given by the developer. And the power source will be the type of renewables used. If supplied by a PPA, it will display the renewable type of the PPA, and if not, it will be blank. So for the build statuses, so the build status 1 is the stage of the project pre-build, and build status 2 is the stage of the project in the during and post-build phase. The known construction start date is got from a press release or another type of news article at the time of building, and it'll be the month of construction start. So looking deeper into those under construction sites, most of the capacity is in that 100 to 1,000 megawatt sites, with the few greater than 1,000 sites being second in global capacity. For the rest of the world segment, most of it is a NEOM project in Saudi Arabia, with the rest of the capacity coming mostly from sites in Southeast Asia, Canada, and South America. Developers tend to be developing less in those intermediate phases and more, and building mostly between 10 to 50 and 100 to 1,000 megawatts. One current business model is to take large-scale projects in places with cheaper costs of hydrogen, then sell into Europe or East Asia at higher prices. To transport hydrogen this far, you usually use one of 3 methods. So you make it into a liquid, which is quite expensive and complex, but you don't need to get any other gases to help. You can make the hydrogen into ammonia by adding nitrogen, or you can add carbon and oxygen to make it into methanol. These 2 gases are used in areas that green hydrogen is used to decarbonize. So instead of doing the long process to convert it back, some off-takers just buy the product as ammonia or methanol. Technology-wise, alkaline electrolysis is the key technology for the largest scale projects. Proton exchange membrane, or PEM, is popular in Europe, the US, and Canada, especially for projects 100 megawatts or below. But the larger scale projects in these regions tend to use alkaline, as it's the cheapest and most proven technology. So this graph will show the operational capacity by year. The cumulative capacity is on the right y-axis, and the installed capacity by year is on the left y-axis. So looking at the size of sites, they are much smaller than the under construction ones, as you might expect. Currently, most operational capacity is in that 100 to 50 megawatt, 10 to 50 megawatt range, with almost half of the 2024 capacity being in those sizes. Looking at the pipeline then, operational capacity should continue to grow into the future, with spikes in the years where huge projects go operational. There are currently 20 sites under construction, bigger than the largest operational site. In 2023, 55 sites went operational compared to 86 in 2024. This growth in actual numbers does show the potential for the pipeline to mature. And another promising sign of growth is the range in which the largest amount of projects, so that 1 to 10 megawatt range, which are mostly used for refueling stations and small industrial plants blended with natural gas usually, have had a capacity growth every year this decade. So some of the key takeaways is the average size of project is increasing, so 10 to 50 currently the driving force of operational capacity, with the 100 to 1,000 should be overtaking in the next few years. There are currently 20 sites under construction, bigger than the largest operational site in the world. India is a big growth market and has more than 60 projects in the pipeline over 100 megawatts, and the third highest total pipeline in terms of capacity for any country worldwide. And that China has operational capacity across more than 50 projects above a megawatt to date. So thank you for listening. Do you guys have any questions?
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, what we'll do is we'll move on to a little Q&A now. So if you do have any questions, please submit them into the box. Yeah, we do have one question, Joe, which is, how do you source the data for the database?
So many different sources. You can mainly get them from news articles, developer, electrolyzer supply and EPC's websites and press releases. Quarterly financial reports are quite useful as well, especially for companies that are, especially for the developers or electrolyzer suppliers, that you can see which projects that they are supplying or developing. And so funding announcements as well, quite useful, especially for the funding part of the database.
Brilliant. The next question is, how often is the data updated and when is it updated?
So if you buy the yearly subscription, the data will be updated every 3 months, and you'll get a new file every 3 months, which will be labeled that you can see the new updates in the site. But I work on the database every day, and it's my full-time job to update the database. So it will be updated every day, but you only receive a file every 3 months.
Next question we have is, how reliable is the data, specifically from China?
So for China, I do it quite differently to I do for everything else, but you can see most of it is publicly available on Chinese news websites, and others are from quarterly reports from some of the developers or suppliers in there. I think it's pretty reliable. You can see, like, they will release how many electrolyzers they use for each project, and you can work backwards from the meters cubed that they will produce and to find the megawatts. And I think, yeah, so that's kind of how I get the data from China.
Brilliant. Also, just on China, we have another question. Is China just going to dominate the green hydrogen market, likely how they have done for the other renewable energy technologies, or are there any other countries that can challenge them?
I think other countries can challenge them I think a lot of the cost for green hydrogen is the cost of the renewable asset, I say. So China currently has some of the cheapest renewable energy in the world. So I think it's not a foregone conclusion they will dominate green hydrogen if other countries can lower the price of the renewable assets. But I think for now, China are in a very, very strong position, and they will keep outbuilding everyone else for the near future, definitely.
Right. And just on electrolyzers, someone's asked, what are the advantages of PEM electrolyzers over alkaline?
So mainly PEM will produce more pure hydrogen most of the time, and they will be able to be ramped up in, I think, 5 minutes compared to an alkaline, which will be 30 minutes. So PEM are quite useful, especially for especially for smaller projects or something that runs only off of something like a solar or a storage array, because you need to be able to be turning it off and on quite quickly. Also, they'll probably last a bit longer, because for the alkaline, you have to be turning them off and on so much that it will kind of reduce the efficiency of the stacks if you keep turning them off and on. And so I think why a lot of the bigger projects move to alkaline, one, because it's cheaper, two, because if you have a lot of different, so for the bigger projects, they'll be running off wind and solar and usually storage as well. So for those bigger projects, you will not have to turn it off and on as much, because you have so many different types of renewable generation, as opposed to the smaller projects that you'll have to be flipping it off and on and to get as much as you can off of one renewable asset.
Great. And there was a question here: how do I get access to the detailed report? If you want to get access, you just need to drop myself an email. It's maxim.ellacott@informa.com. And then what we'll essentially do is book in a more in-depth demo for you and run through any use cases that you have more specific to yourself. Just have a look at what else there is. Here's another one. Are the electrolyser suppliers global or also from China?
So it's quite interesting that. So PEM is mostly manufactured in Europe, where China are trying to catch up with PEM, but most of the Chinese electrolyser manufacturing is alkaline right now. I think there is a global stage for electrolyser manufacturing currently, and we will see into the future if that stays the same. I think you get more incentives from, say, the EU if your electrolyzers are European manufactured. So I think I think the manufacturing should remain global, at least for the next couple of years, especially with PEM being the growing technology in the space. And there are other technologies as well that won't be as much in the database because they're quite new and don't have utility scale projects yet. But I think AEM and a lot of those are kind of being manufactured in Europe, and solid oxide electrolyzer cells, I think the leader in producing those are in Denmark. So I think because we got such a technology split in the sector, I think it'll be different than some other renewables who are a bit more established.
Right. And next question is, what's the outlook for the UK and Ireland becoming major green hydrogen exporters?
I wouldn't say great, but I think if we being in the UK myself, if we can get a lot of those excess power and get the cost of power down, then I don't see why it shouldn't be. I think offshore wind will be, for Europe really, and especially the UK, is quite a big asset that we have. So if you can produce, I think places where green hydrogen is most useful is places where you have excess power. So if you have those big offshore wind farms, sometimes you don't need all of that power. You can use them to power some electrolyzers and export the hydrogen to areas where they need it. So, make it into methanol for fuels, or you can make it into ammonia for fertilizers to ship around the world, or stuff like that. So yeah, I think there's a potential path.
Brilliant. Yeah. And in terms of growth for green hydrogen globally, another question we've had is, at what stage are we in the growth of green hydrogen? What is the growth trajectory like, and which countries will see the most growth, and how quickly?
I think we're in quite the early stages. So I think if we go back to the operational graphic, it's somewhere close to 2 gigawatts now operational. So I think we're in the very early stages of green hydrogen as a technology, and I think you'll see many technologies moving up and down to kind of see which is the most financially viable, effectively. So I think some of the countries that you'll see it in is, I think lots of places like the Middle East is quite big with they're building a lot now, and I think if you can get the kind of shipping model right, then I think South America has huge potential. And obviously China, Japan and Korea have South Korea have mostly decided to they're less developing projects in their own countries and kind of more as off takers. So I think places that can ship to Europe, ship to East Asia, and I think those should be the places that will be developing in the coming years.
Right. And just another question on electrolyzers. What are your views on solid oxide electrolyzers? Is it promising?
I think it's promising. I think, again, you'll have to wait until the first couple of big projects come down. I think there's one that's meant to be built in Texas coming in the next few years. So I think until you have those large scale facilities built, you can't say for sure, right? But I think being able to do something at a more efficient rate is always good, even if it requires high temperatures. But I think I quite like solid oxide as a technology.
Yeah, brilliant. And just another one that's related to wind power. Someone's asked, are people producing green hydrogen from curtailed wind power at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it's exactly curtailed, but I think a lot of green hydrogen is produced from wind power. So, yes, what I can say.
Sure, no worries. And just another one here is, what is, or do you know what the projection for hydrogen filling stations will be to be available across the UK?
Not sure across the UK. I think as more electrolyzers go down, I think more people will be building filling stations. I think as the technology improves, the filling stations and the price of hydrogen will be cheaper and cheaper. I think a lot of places now build electrolyzers in a filling station, so you don't have to transport the hydrogen, across the country, and so I think they'll continue to go up, but as long as there are more electrolyzers producing, there'll be more filling stations.
Right. And another question we have is, how do you see the role of ports, or I guess, how do you view the role of ports in the green hydrogen landscape?
I think they're very important. One, just to get the hydrogen to other places, right? And then two, because hydrogen or the derivatives of hydrogen can be used as marine fuel. So a lot of Molenbeek using a lot of methanol having a lot of methanol powered ships. So I think the ports are very, very important. And you see, I think, especially in those kind of South America and the Middle East, a lot of people are building ports as part of so you'll build a port and then you'll build a hydrogen project next to it. So it can be transported and you can use it as fuels. So I think ports are very, very important.
Brilliant. And related to a question we just had before, what size and type of electrolyzer do you need for an average filling station, if you maybe have an idea?
It wouldn't be too big. I think most of them will be PEM because a lot of the fuel cell cars will require quite pure hydrogen, and it'll be easier to not have to purify it. So it'll be 1 megawatt for a normal one, maybe even smaller, or a little bit bigger if you want a bigger filling station. But I don't think it's not like huge. Most of those hydrogen fuel stations kind of have 1 to 5 megawatt powering them either being shipped to them or pipelined to them from a central electrolyser plant. So there's a lot of those in France, and then or you can build the 1 or 2 megawatt electrolyser on site and then produce the hydrogen and get it all from there.
Next question we have is, do you think green hydrogen projects can get subsidies from government, especially in Europe, for carbon emissions reduction goals?
Yeah, there are many European funding program. So the IPCEI, important project of European common interest, had a couple of rounds of funding, and then there are the hydrogen auctions coming up in, I think, February this year. So I think you get a lot of, especially in Europe, there are a lot of subsidies. So you can sort of, there's a lot of subsidies in Europe. So yeah, a lot of subsidies in Europe for green hydrogen to be used as a fuel or to be used as an industry.
Great. And we did have a question, which was, what is the cost of the database? So I'll be able to answer this one. The cost is £3,000 plus VAT, and that's for the annual subscription. And as Joe mentioned before, it's updated quarterly. So at the start of every quarter, you'd receive an updated version of the database. So 4 copies total for the year. Another question we have is, do you see a need for greater support to allow investors to create greater awareness and visibility for green hydrogen projects around the world?
Sorry, could you repeat that one?
Yeah, sorry. Do you see a need for greater support to allow investors greater awareness or visibility for green hydrogen projects around the world?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think a lot of people kind of, because there was a lot of hype about it a couple of years ago with a kind of fix everything type of renewable. But I think in the recent years you can kind of see more all of the realistic projects kind of come to head, and you want the good projects that do get funding. So I think there is a need for support to kind of show investors that this is a technology that's worth investing in.
Right. I have another question here. It's a bit of a long one, but who would size and investigate an economic case for an off-grid hydrogen production system? Grid for supply, only no export capability.
I'm not completely sure about that one, sorry.
Sure, no worries at all. Next one we have is, does the UK government provide an equal amount of subsidies / support as the EU?
I think the EU supply more. I mean, it's a bigger state. Got more money effectively. But I think the UK's the HAR1 round. I mean, the subsidies are competitive. It's just for fewer projects. And what would you do as part of the EU?
We have another question, which is, what's the best way to source private capital for green hydrogen projects?
So I think many of the ways you'd source private capital for other things, so banks, investment banks, green specific investment banks, stuff like that. Yeah.
Great. We do have a couple of minutes left if anyone has any final questions. Oh, we've got another one. What is the main thing holding back development?
I think you can sort of see a little bit of a divide between the cost of development and then the cost of people who want to buy it as off-takers. I think both sides will probably need to bring it down and meet in the middle a little bit, but I think cost is probably the main one, really.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. So I think that's all we have time for, everyone. I'd like to take this time to thank Joe for speaking and thank everyone again for joining. For anyone with further questions or questions that we didn't have time to answer, feel free to get in contact via the email after the session. And as I said, if you'd like to get access to the data, feel free to drop me an email and we can sort out a more in-depth demo. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining.